Chapter 4. The Virtuous Guardians and the Descent into Tyranny. Adimantus asked a question. How would you respond, Socrates, said he, if someone were to say that you are making these people miserable, and that they are the cause of their own unhappiness? The city in fact belongs to them, but they are none the better for it, whereas other men acquire lands, and build large and beautiful houses, and have everything luxurious around them, offering sacrifices to the gods for their own benefit, and practicing hospitality, moreover, as you were saying just now, they have gold and silver, and all that is usual among the fortunate, but our poor citizens are no better than mercenaries who are stationed in the city and are always on guard. Yes, I said, and you may add that they are only fed, and not paid in addition to their food, like other men, and therefore they cannot, if they would, take a pleasure trip. They have no money to spend on a mistress or any other luxurious fancy, which, as the world goes, is considered happiness, and many other accusations of the same kind could be added. But, said he, let us suppose all this to be included in the charge. You mean to ask, I said, what will be our response? Yes. If we continue along the old path, my belief, I said, is that we shall find the answer. And our answer will be that, even as they are, our guardians may very well be the happiest of men, but that our goal in founding the state was not the disproportionate happiness of any one class, but the greatest happiness of the whole. We thought that in a state which is ordered with a view to the good of the whole we should be most likely to find justice, and in the disorderly state injustice, and, having found them, we might then decide which of the two is the happier. Currently, I understand that we are constructing a happy society, not piece by piece, or with the intention of making a few content citizens, but later, we will examine the opposite type of society. Imagine that we were painting a statue, and someone approached us and asked, why don't you use the most beautiful colors on the most beautiful parts of the body? The eyes should be purple, but you have made them black. To that person we could reasonably reply, Sir, you surely don't want us to enhance the eyes to such an extent that they are no longer recognizable as eyes. Instead, consider whether by giving each feature its proper proportion, we make the whole statue beautiful. And so, I say to you, don't force us to assign a kind of happiness to the guardians that would make them anything but guardians, for we could also dress our farmers in royal clothing, place golden crowns on their heads, and allow them to till the land as much as they desire, but no more. Our potters could also be allowed to relax on couches, feast by the fireplace, pass around the wineglass, and only work on pottery as much as they desire. This way, we could make every class happy, and then, as you imagine, the entire society would be happy. But don't put this idea in our heads, for if we listen to you, the farmer will no longer be a farmer, the potter will cease to be a potter, and no one will have the identity of any specific class in society. Now, this is not very important when the corruption of society and the pretense of being something you are not limited to cobblers, but when the guardians of the laws and government are only pretending to be guardians, then you can see how they disrupt the society, and on the other hand, they alone have the power to bring order and happiness to the society. We intend for our guardians to be true saviors and not the destroyers of the society, whereas our opponent is thinking of peasants at a festival, who are enjoying a life of revelry, not of citizens who are fulfilling their duties to the society. But, if that's the case, we have different intentions, and he is talking about something that is not a society. Therefore, we must consider whether, when appointing our guardians, we should prioritize their individual happiness or whether this principle of happiness resides in society. But if the latter is true, then the guardians, auxiliaries, and all others equally, must be compelled or persuaded to do their own work in the best possible way. And thus, the entire society will develop in a noble order, and the different classes will receive the level of happiness that nature assigns to them. Socrates, I believe you are correct. I wonder if you will agree with another observation that comes to mind. Adimantus, what might that be? Socrates, it appears that there are two causes for the decline of the arts. Adimantus, what are they? Socrates, wealth, I said, and poverty. Adimantus, how do they affect the arts? Socrates, the process is as follows. When a potter becomes rich, do you think he will continue to put the same effort into his craft? Adimantus, certainly not. He will become more and more lazy and careless. Socrates, absolutely. And as a result, he will become a worse potter? Adimantus, yes, he will greatly deteriorate. But on the other hand, if he has no money and cannot afford tools or equipment, he will not work as well himself, nor will he teach his sons or apprentices to work equally well. Socrates, not. So, under the influence of either poverty or wealth, craftsmen and their work are equally susceptible to decline? Adimantus, that is clear. Therefore, here is a discovery of new problems, I said, that the guardians will have to watch out for, or they will sneak into the city unnoticed. Adimantus, what problems? Socrates, wealth, I said, and poverty. Wealth leads to luxury and laziness, and poverty leads to meanness and wickedness, and both lead to discontent. Adimantus, that is very true, Socrates. But still, I would like to know how our city will be able to go to war, especially against a rich and powerful enemy, if we lack the resources for war. Socrates, there would certainly be a difficulty, I replied, in going to war against such an enemy, but there is no difficulty when there are two of them. Adimantus, how so? Socrates, first, I said, if we must fight, our side will consist of trained warriors fighting against an army of wealthy individuals. Adimantus, that is true. Socrates, and don't you think, Adimantus, that a skilled boxer would easily defeat two strong and prosperous gentlemen who are not boxers? Adimantus, hardly if they attacked him at the same time. Socrates, well, I said, what if he were able to run away and then turn around and strike the one who approached him first? And suppose he were to do this multiple times under the scorching sun, could he not, being an expert, overcome more than one stout person? Adimantus, certainly, there would be nothing surprising about that. Socrates, and yet, rich individuals probably have a greater advantage in the science and practice of boxing than they do in military qualities. Adimantus, quite possible. Socrates, so, we can assume that our athletes will be able to fight against 2 or 3 times their own number? Adimantus, I agree with you, for I think you are correct. Socrates, and imagine that, before engaging in battle, our citizens send an embassy to one of the 2 cities, informing them of the truth. We neither have nor are allowed to possess silver and gold, but you may, therefore, come and assist us in war, and take the spoils of the other city, who, upon hearing these words, would choose to fight against lean and agile dogs, rather than, with the dogs on their side, fight against fat and tender sheep? Adimantus, that is unlikely. And yet there might be a danger to the poor city if the wealth of many cities were to be consolidated into one. Socrates, but how simple of you to use the term nation at all any but our own. Adimantus, why so? Socrates, you ought to speak of other nations in the plural number. Not one of them is a city, but many cities, as they say in the game. For indeed any city, however small, is in fact divided into 2, one the city of the poor, the other of the rich. These are at war with one another, and in either there are many smaller divisions, and you would be altogether beside the mark if you treated them all as a single nation. But if you deal with them as many and give the wealth or power or persons of the one to the others, you will always have a great many friends and not many enemies. And your nation, while the wise order which has now been prescribed continues to prevail in her, will be the greatest of nations, I do not mean to say in reputation or appearance, but indeed in truth, though she numbers not more than 1,000 defenders. A single nation, which is her equal you, will hardly find either among Hellenes or barbarians, though many that appear to be as great and many times greater. That is a lot to consider, I said. We must establish rules and regulations for all these matters. Each aspect of society requires its own set of guidelines to ensure order and fairness. Let us start with the agora, the marketplace, and the interactions between individuals. We need to establish rules for conducting business and resolving disputes. Insults and injuries must be addressed, and legal actions must be initiated when necessary. Additionally, we must establish regulations for market and harbor dues, as well as the management of markets, police, and harbors. All these aspects of society require careful attention and regulation to maintain order and ensure the smooth functioning of the city. But, oh heavens! Shall we really condescend to legislate on any of these details? I think, he said, that there is no need to impose laws about them on good men. They will figure out the necessary regulations for themselves. Yes, I said, my friend, if God will only preserve the laws which we have given them. And without divine help, said Adimantus, they will forever continue making and amending their laws and their lives in the hope of achieving perfection. You would compare them, I said, to those invalids who, having no self-control, refuse to give up their habits of excess? Exactly. Yes, I said, and what a delightful life they lead. They are always trying different remedies and complicating their disorders, always believing that they will be cured by any remedy that anyone advises them to try. Such cases are very common, he said, with invalids of this sort. Yes, I replied, and the charming thing is that they consider him their worst enemy who tells them the truth, which is simply that unless they give up indulging in food, drink, pleasure, and idleness, no remedy will help them. Charming? He replied. I see nothing charming in getting angry with a person who tells you what is right. These gentlemen, I said, do not seem to be in your good graces. Assuredly not. Nor would you praise the behavior of states, which act like the men whom I was just now describing. Are there not ill-ordered states in which the citizens are forbidden, under penalty of death, to alter the constitution? Yet, the person who sweetly courts those who live under this regime, indulges them, flatters them, and is skilled in anticipating and satisfying their desires, is considered a great and good statesman. Don't these states resemble the people I was describing? Yes, he said, the states are as bad as the men, and I am very far from praising them. But do you not admire, I said, the coolness and skill of these ready ministers of political corruption? Yes, he said, I do, but not all of them, for some are deluded by the applause of the masses into believing that they are truly statesmen, and these are not to be admired much. What do you mean? I said, you should have more sympathy for them. When a man cannot measure his own height, and a great many others who cannot measure declare that he is 4 cubits high, can he help believing what they say? Nay, he said, certainly not in that case. Well, then, do not be angry with them, for aren't they like actors, trying their hand at insignificant reforms such as I was describing? They always believe that by legislating they will put an end to fraud in contracts and other forms of dishonesty, not realizing that they are cutting off the heads of a hydra. Yes, he said, that is just what they are doing. I believe, I said, that the true legislator will not concern himself with this type of legislation, whether concerning laws or the Constitution, in either an ill-ordered or well-ordered state, for in the former, they are completely useless, and in the latter, they will not be difficult to devise. Many of them will naturally follow from our previous regulations. So, what is left for us to do in terms of legislation? Nothing for us, I replied, but for Apollo, the god of Delphi, there remains the task of ordering the greatest and noblest and most important things of all. What are they? He said. The establishment of temples and sacrifices, and the entire worship of gods, demigods, and heroes, also, the organization of burial sites and the rituals that must be observed by those who wish to appease the inhabitants of the underworld. These are matters about which we ourselves are ignorant, and as the founders of a city, it would be unwise to entrust them to anyone other than our ancestral deity. He is the God who sits at the center, on the navel of the earth, and he is the interpreter of religion for all mankind. You are right, and we will do as you suggest. But during all this, where is justice? Son of Ariston, tell me, where is it? Now that our city has become habitable, light a candle and search, and get your brother and Polemarch and the rest of our friends to help, and let us see wherein it we can find justice and injustice, how they differ from each other, and which of them the person who wants to be happy should choose, whether seen or unseen by gods and men. Nonsense, said Glaucon, didn't you promise to search yourself, saying that it would be impious for you not to assist justice in her time of need? I do not deny that I said so, and as you remind me, I will keep my word, but you must join me. We will, he replied. Well, then, I hope to make the discovery in this way. I mean to begin with the assumption that our state, if rightly ordered, is perfect. That is most certain. And being perfect, is therefore wise and brave and moderate and just. That is likewise clear. And whichever of these qualities we find in the state, the one which is not found will be the residue? Very good. If there were 4 things, and we were searching for one of them, wherever it might be, the one sought for might be known to us from the first, and there would be no further trouble, or we might know the other 3 first, and then the 4th would clearly be the one left. Very true, he said. And is not a similar method to be pursued about the virtues, which are also 4 in number? Clearly. First among the virtues found in the state, wisdom comes into view, and in this I detect a certain peculiarity. What is that? The state which we have been describing is said to be wise as being good in counsel? Very true. And good counsel is clearly a kind of knowledge, for not by ignorance, but by knowledge, do men counsel well? Clearly. And the kinds of knowledge in a state are many and diverse? Of course. There is the knowledge of the carpenter, but is that the sort of knowledge which gives a city the title of wise and good in counsel? Certainly not, that would only give a city the reputation of skill in carpentry. Then a city is not to be called wise, because possessing a knowledge which counsels for the best about wooden implements. Certainly not. Nor, by reason of a knowledge which advises about metal pots, I said, nor as possessing any other similar knowledge. Not by reason of any of them, he said. Nor yet by reason of a knowledge which cultivates the land, that would give the city the name of agricultural? Yes. Well, I said, and is there any knowledge in our recently founded state among any of the citizens which advises, not about any particular thing in the state, but about the whole, and considers how a state can best deal with itself and with other states? There certainly is. And what is this knowledge, and among whom is it found? I asked. It is the knowledge of the guardians, he replied, and is found among those whom we were just now describing as perfect guardians. And what is the name which the city derives from the possession of this sort of knowledge? The name of good in counsel and truly wise. And will there be in our city more of these true guardians or more smiths? The smiths, he replied, will be far more numerous. Will not the guardians be the smallest of all the classes who receive a name from the profession of some kind of knowledge? Much the smallest. And so, by reason of the smallest part or class, and of the knowledge which resides in this presiding and ruling part of itself, the whole state, being thus constituted according to nature, will be wise, and this, which has the only knowledge worthy to be called wisdom, has been ordained by nature to be of all classes the least. Most true. Thus, then, I said, the nature and place in the state of one of the 4 virtues has somehow or other been discovered. And, in my humble opinion, very satisfactorily discovered, he replied. Again, I said, there is no difficulty in seeing the nature of courage, and in what part that quality resides which gives the name of courageous to the state. How do you mean? Why, I said, everyone who calls any state courageous or cowardly will be thinking of the part which fights and goes out to war on the state's behalf. No one, he replied, would ever think of any other. The rest of the citizens may be courageous or may be cowardly, but their courage or cowardice will not, as I conceive, have the effect of making the city either the one or the other. Certainly not. The city will be courageous in virtue of a portion of herself which preserves under all circumstances that opinion about the nature of things to be feared and not to be feared in which our legislator educated them, and this is what you term courage. I should like to hear what you are saying once more, for I do not think that I perfectly understand you. I mean that courage is a kind of salvation. Salvation of what? Of the opinion respecting things to be feared, what they are and of what nature, which the law implants through education, and I mean by the words under all circumstances to intimate that in pleasure or in pain, or under the influence of desire or fear, a man preserves, and does not lose this opinion. Shall I give you an illustration? If you please. You know, I said, that dyers, when they want to dye wool for making the true sea purple, begin by selecting their white color first. This they prepare and dress with much care and pains, in order that the white ground may take the purple hue in full perfection. The coloring then continues, and whatever is colored in this manner becomes a permanent color, and no washing either with chemicals or without them can remove the vibrancy. But, when the foundation has not been properly prepared, you will have noticed how poor is the appearance either of purple or of any other color. Yes, he said, I know that they have a faded and ridiculous appearance. Then now, I said, you will understand what our goal was in selecting our soldiers, and educating them in music and physical training. We were creating influences which would prepare them to fully embrace the laws, and their opinions about dangers and every other matter were to be permanently shaped by their upbringing and training, not to be erased by such powerful chemicals as pleasure, more powerful in cleansing the soul than any soap or detergent, or by sorrow, fear, and desire, the most powerful of all other solvents. And this kind of universal saving power of true opinion in accordance with law about real and false dangers I call and argue to be courage, unless you disagree. But I agree, Glaucon replied, for I suppose that you mean to exclude mere uninstructed courage, such as that of a wild animal or of a slave. This, in your opinion, is not the courage which the law ordains, and ought to have another name. Most certainly. Then I may conclude courage to be such as you describe? Why, yes, said I, you may, and if you add the words of a citizen, you will not be far wrong. Later on, if you like, we will continue the examination, but for now we are searching not for courage, but justice, and for the purpose of our investigation, we have said enough. You are right, Glaucon replied. Two virtues remain to be discovered in the state: first, self-control, and then justice, which is the end of our search. Very true. Now, can we find justice without concerning ourselves about self-control? I do not know how that can be achieved, Glaucon said, nor do I desire that justice should be revealed and self-control ignored, and therefore, I wish that you would do me the favor of considering self-control first. Certainly, I replied, I should not be justified in refusing your request. Then consider, Glaucon said. Yes, I replied, I will, and as far as I can currently see, the virtue of self-control has more of the nature of harmony and agreement than the previous one. How so? He asked. Self-control, I replied, is the ordering or controlling of certain pleasures and desires. This is curiously enough implied in the saying of a man being his own master, and other traces of the same notion may be found in language. No doubt, he said. There is something ridiculous in the expression master of himself, for the master is also the servant and the servant the master, and in all these modes of speaking the same person is denoted. Certainly, I replied. The meaning is, I believe, that in the human soul there is a better and also a worse principle, and when the better has the worse under control, then a man is said to be master of himself, and this is a term of praise. But when, owing to evil education or association, the better principle, which is also the smaller, is overwhelmed by the greater mass of the worse, in this case he is blamed and is called the slave of self and unprincipled. Yes, there is reason in that, he agreed. And now, I said, look at our newly created state, and there you will find one of these two conditions realized, for the state, as you will acknowledge, may be justly called master of itself, if the words self-control and self-mastery truly express the rule of the better part over the worse. Yes, I see that what you say is true. Let me further note that the manifold and complex pleasures and desires and pains are generally found in children and women and servants, and in the freemen so-called who are of the lowest and more numerous classes. Certainly, he said. whereas the simple and moderate desires, which follow reason and are under the guidance of mind and true opinion, are to be found only in a few, and those the best born and best educated. Very true. These two, as you may perceive, have a place in our state, and the lesser desires of the many are held down by the virtuous desires and wisdom of the few. That I perceive, he said. Then if there be any city which may be described as master of its own pleasures and desires, and master of itself, ours may claim such a designation? Certainly, he replied. It may also be called self-controlled, and for the same reasons? Yes. And if there be any state in which rulers and subjects will be agreed as to the question who are to rule, that again will be our state. Undoubtedly. And the citizens being thus agreed among themselves, in which class will self-control be found, in the rulers or in the subjects? In both, as I should imagine, he replied. Do you observe that we were not far wrong in our guess that self-control was a sort of harmony? Why so? Why, because self-control is unlike courage and wisdom, each of which resides in a part only, the one making the state wise and the other valiant, not so self-control, which extends to the whole, and runs through all the notes of the scale, and produces a harmony of the weaker and the stronger and the middle class, whether you suppose them to be stronger or weaker in wisdom or power or numbers or wealth, or anything else. Most truly then may we deem self-control to be the agreement of the naturally superior and inferior, as to the right to rule of either, both in states and individuals. I completely agree with you. And so, I said, we may consider 3 out of the 4 virtues to have been discovered in our state. The last of those qualities which make a state virtuous must be justice, if we only knew what that was. The inference is obvious. The time then has arrived, Glaucon, when, like hunters, we should surround the cover, and look sharp that justice does not steal away, and pass out of sight and escape us, for beyond a doubt, she is somewhere in this country. Watch therefore and strive to catch a sight of her, and if you see her first, let me know. Would that I could. But you should regard me rather as a follower who has just eyes enough to see what you show him, that is about as much as I am good for. Offer up a prayer with me and follow. I will, but you must show me the way. Here is no path, I said, and the forest is dark and perplexing, still, we must push on. Let's keep going. Here I saw something, hey! I said, I begin to see a trail, and I believe that we won't let the target escape. Good news, he said. Truly, I said, we are foolish fellows. Why so? Why, my good sir, at the beginning of our investigation, ages ago, there was justice right in front of us, and we never saw her. Nothing could be more ridiculous. Like people who go about looking for what they have in their hands, that was the way with us. We looked not at what we were seeking, but at what was far off in the distance, and therefore, I suppose, we missed her. What do you mean? I mean to say that in reality for a long time past we have been talking about justice, and have failed to recognize her. I grow impatient at the length of your introduction. Well then, tell me, I said, whether I am right or not. You remember the original principle which we were always laying down at the foundation of the state, that one man should practice one thing only, the thing to which his nature was best adapted. Now justice is this principle or a part of it. Yes, we often said that one man should do one thing only. Further, we affirmed that justice was doing one's own business, and not being a busybody. We said so again and again, and many others have said the same to us. Yes, we said so. Then to do one's own business in a certain way may be assumed to be justice. Can you tell me whence I derive this inference? I cannot, but I would like to be told. Because I think that this is the only virtue which remains in the state when the other virtues of temperance and courage and wisdom are abstracted, and that this is the ultimate cause and condition of the existence of all of them, and while remaining in them is also their preservative. And we were saying that if the 3 were discovered by us, justice would be the 4th or remaining one. That follows of necessity. If we are asked to determine which of these 4 qualities by its presence contributes most to the excellence of the state, whether the agreement of rulers and subjects, or the preservation in the soldiers of the opinion which the law ordains about the true nature of dangers, or wisdom and watchfulness in the rulers, or whether this other which I am mentioning, and which is found in children and women, slave and freeman, artisan, ruler, subject, the quality, I mean, of every one doing his own work, and not being a busybody, would claim the palm, the question is not so easily answered. Certainly, he replied, there would be a difficulty in saying which. Then the power of everyone in the state to do his own work appears to compete with the other political virtues, wisdom, temperance, courage. Yes, he said. And the virtue which enters this competition is justice? Exactly. Let us look at the question from another point of view. Are not the rulers in a state those to whom you would entrust the office of determining suits at law? Certainly. And are suits decided on any other ground but that a man may neither take what is another's, nor be deprived of what is his own? Yes, that is their principle. Which is a just principle? Yes. Then on this view also justice will be admitted being the having and doing what is a man's own, and belongs to him? Very true. Think, now, and say whether you agree with me or not. Suppose a carpenter to be doing the business of a cobbler, or a cobbler of a carpenter, and suppose them to exchange their tools or their duties, or the same person to be doing the work of both, or whatever be the change, do you think that any great harm would result to the state? Not much. But when the cobbler or any other man whom nature designed to be a trader, having his heart lifted up by wealth or strength or the number of his followers, or any like advantage, attempts to force his way into the class of warriors, or a warrior into that of legislators and guardians, for which he is unfitted, and either to take the tools or the duties of the other, or when one man is trader, legislator, and warrior all in one, then I think you will agree with me in saying that this interchange and this meddling of one with another is the ruin of the state. Most true. Seeing then, I said, that there are three distinct classes, any meddling of one with another, or the change of one into another, is the greatest harm to the state, and may be most justly termed evil-doing? Precisely. And the greatest degree of evil-doing to one's own city would be termed by your injustice? Certainly. This then is unfairness, and on the other hand, when the trader, the helper, and the protector each do their own business, that is fairness, and will make the city fair. I agree with you. We will not, I said, be overly certain yet, but if, on trial, this concept of fairness is confirmed in the individual as well as in the state, there will no longer be any room for doubt. If it is not confirmed, we must have a fresh inquiry. First let us complete the old investigation, which we began, as you remember, under the impression that, if we could previously examine fairness on the larger scale, there would be less difficulty in discerning her in the individual. That larger example appeared to be the state, and accordingly we constructed as good a one as we could, knowing well that in the good state fairness would be found. Let the discovery which we made be now applied to the individual. If they agree, we shall be satisfied, or, if there be a difference in the individual, we will come back to the state and have another trial of the theory. The friction of the two when rubbed together may possibly strike a light in which fairness will shine forth, and the vision which is then revealed we will fix in our souls. That will be in regular course, let us do as you say. Socrates proceeded to ask, when two things, a greater and lesser, are called by the same name, are they similar or dissimilar in so far as they are called the same? Similar, he replied. Socrates continued, the fair person then, if we regard the idea of fairness only, will be like the fair state? He will. Socrates clarified, and a state was thought by us to be fair when the three classes in the state each did their own business, and thought to be moderate and courageous and wise by reason of certain other emotions and qualities of these same classes? True, he said. Socrates then proposed, and so of the individual, we may assume that he has the same three principles in his own soul which are found in the state, and he may be rightly described in the same terms, because he is affected in the same manner? Certainly, he said. Socrates exclaimed, once more then, my friend, we have come upon an easy question, whether the soul has these three principles or not. An easy question. Nay, rather, Socrates, the saying holds that hard is the good. Very true, I said, and I do not think that the method which we are employing is at all adequate to the accurate solution of this question. The true method is another and a longer one. Still, we may arrive at a solution not below the level of the previous inquiry. May we not be satisfied with that? He said, under the circumstances, I am quite content. I too, I replied, shall be extremely well satisfied. Then do not lose hope in pursuing the speculation, he said. Socrates continued, must we not acknowledge, I said, that in each of us there are the same principles and habits which there are in the state, and that from the individual they pass into the state, how else can they come there? Take the quality of passion or spirit, it would be ridiculous to imagine that this quality, when found in states, is not derived from the individuals who are supposed to possess it, e.g. the Thracians, Scythians, and in general, the northern nations, and the same may be said of the love of knowledge, which is the special characteristic of our part of the world, or of the love of money, which may, with equal truth, be attributed to the Phoenicians and Egyptians. Exactly so, he said. There is no difficulty in understanding this. None whatever. But the question is not quite so easy when we proceed to ask whether these principles are three or one, whether, that is to say, we learn with one part of our nature, are angry with another, and with a third part desire the satisfaction of our natural appetites, or whether the whole soul comes into play in each sort of action, to determine that is the difficulty. Yes, he said, there lies the difficulty. Then let us now try and determine whether they are the same or different. How can we? He asked. I replied as follows. The same thing clearly cannot act or be acted upon in the same part or in relation to the same thing at the same time, in contrary ways, and therefore, whenever this contradiction occurs in things apparently the same, we know that they are not the same, but different. Good. For example, I said, can the same thing be at rest and in motion at the same time in the same part? Impossible. Still, I said, let us have a more precise statement of terms, lest we should hereafter fall out by the way. Imagine the case of a man who is standing and moving his hands and his head, and suppose a person to say that one and the same person is in motion and at rest at the same moment. To such a mode of speech we should object and should rather say that one part of him is in motion while another is at rest. Very true. And suppose the objector to refine still further, and to draw the nice distinction that not only parts of tops, but whole tops, when they spin round with their pegs fixed on the spot, are at rest and in motion at the same time, and he may say the same of anything which revolves in the same spot, his objection would not be admitted by us, because in such cases things are not at rest and in motion in the same parts of themselves. We should rather say that they have both an axis and a circumference, and that the axis stands still, for there is no deviation from the perpendicular, and that the circumference goes round. But if, while spinning, the axis leans either to the right or left, forwards or backwards, then in no perspective can they be at rest. That is the correct way of describing them, he replied. Then none of these objections will confuse us or lead us to believe that the same thing at the same time, in the same part or in relation to the same thing, can act or be acted upon in contrary ways. Certainly not, according to my way of thinking. Yet, I said that we may not be compelled to examine all such objections, and prove at length that they are untrue. Let us assume their absurdity, and go forward on the understanding that hereafter, if this assumption turns out to be untrue, all the consequences which follow shall be withdrawn. Yes, he said, that will be the best way. Well, I said, would you not allow that agreement and disagreement, want and dislike, attraction and repulsion, are all of them opposites, whether they are regarded as active or passive, for that makes no difference in the fact of their opposition? Yes, he said, they are opposites. Well, I said, addressing my companion, hunger, thirst, and desires in general, as well as willingness and wishing, can all be categorized as we have discussed earlier. Would you agree that when someone desires something, their soul is seeking after that object of desire? Or that they are drawing that desired thing towards themselves? Similarly, when a person wants something to be given to them, their mind, longing for the fulfillment of their desire, indicates their wish to have it through a nod of agreement, as if they were asked a question? Very true, my companion replied. And what about unwillingness, dislike, and the absence of desire? Shouldn't these be categorized as repulsion and rejection? I asked. Certainly, he agreed. Assuming this is true for desires in general, let's consider a specific category of desires. Let's choose hunger and thirst, as they are the most obvious ones, I suggested. Let's go with that category, he said. So, hunger is the desire for food, and thirst is the desire for drink, correct? I asked. Yes, he confirmed. Now, here's the point, isn't thirst the desire that the soul has specifically for drink, and only drink? Is drink qualified by any other characteristics, such as warm or cold, or a specific quantity? But if the thirst is accompanied by heat, then the desire is for cold drink. Or if the thirst is accompanied by cold, then the desire is for warm drink. And if the thirst is excessive, then the desired drink will be excessive. Or if the thirst is not great, then the quantity of drink desired will be small. But pure and simple thirst desires pure and simple drink, which is the natural satisfaction of thirst, just as food is the satisfaction of hunger, I explained. Yes, the simple desire is always for the simple object, and the qualified desire is for the qualified object, he agreed. But here, a confusion may arise. I want to guard against an opponent claiming that no one desires just drink, but rather good drink. Or no one desires just food, but rather good food. Because good is the universal object of desire, and since thirst is a desire, it will naturally be a desire for good drink. The same applies to every other desire, I said. Yes, the opponent might have something to say, he acknowledged. Nevertheless, I still maintain that some relatives have a quality attached to each term of the relation, while others are simple and have their correlatives as simple. I'm not sure what you mean, I admitted. Well, you know that the greater is relative to the lesser, right? He asked. Certainly, I replied. And the much greater is relative to the much lesser, he continued. Yes, I agreed. And the sometimes greater is relative to the sometimes lesser, and the greater that is to be is relative to the lesser that is to be, he asked. Certainly, I said. And the same applies to more and less, and other correlative terms like double and half, or heavier and lighter, swifter and slower, hot and cold, and any other relatives. This is true for all of them, isn't it? He questioned. Yes, I confirmed. And doesn't the same principle apply to the sciences? The object of science is knowledge, assuming that to be the true definition. But the object of a specific science is a particular kind of knowledge. For example, the science of house building is a kind of knowledge that is defined and distinguished from other kinds, and therefore called architecture, he explained. Certainly, I agreed. And it has this particular quality because it has an object of a specific kind. This is true for other arts and sciences as well, he continued. Now, if I have made myself clear, you will understand my original meaning when I spoke about relatives. My meaning was that if one term of a relation is taken alone, the other is also taken alone. If one term is qualified, the other is also qualified. I don't mean to say that relatives cannot be disparate, or that the science of health is healthy, or that the science of disease is necessarily diseased, or that the sciences of good and evil are therefore good and evil. But when the term science is no longer used in an absolute sense, but has a qualified object like the nature of health and disease, it becomes defined and is called not just science, but the science of medicine, I clarified. I understand completely, and I agree with you, he said. Wouldn't you say that thirst is one of these essentially relative terms, clearly having a relation? I asked. Yes, thirst is relative to drink, he replied. And a certain kind of thirst is relative to a certain kind of drink. But thirst taken alone is neither of much nor little, nor of good nor bad, nor of any specific kind of drink, but simply of drink? I questioned. Certainly, he agreed. So, the spirit of a thirsty person, insofar as they are thirsty, desires only drink. That is what they long for and try to obtain, I stated. That is clear, he said. And if we suppose something that pulls a thirsty soul away from drink, that must be different from the thirsty principle that draws them towards drink. Because, as we previously mentioned, the same thing cannot simultaneously act in contrary ways about the same thing, I pointed out. Impossible, he agreed. Just like you can't say that the hands of an archer push and pull the bow at the same time. Instead, one hand pushes and the other pulls, I explained. Exactly, he replied. And is it possible for a person to be thirsty but unwilling to drink? I asked. Yes, it happens frequently, he said. In such a case, what can we say? Would you not say that there is something in the soul urging a person to drink, and something else forbidding them, which is different and stronger than the urging principle? I proposed. I would say so, he agreed. And the principle of forbidding is derived from reason, and that which commands and attracts comes from passion and desire? Clearly. Then we can assume that they are two different principles, the one with which a person reasons, we can call the rational principle of the soul, and the other, with which he loves and hungers and thirsts and feels the fluttering of any other desire, can be called the irrational or appetitive principle, the ally of various pleasures and satisfactions. Yes, we can assume that they are different. So, let us finally determine that there are two principles existing in the soul. And what about passion, or spirit? Is it a third principle, or is it related to one of the previous ones? I would say it is related to desire. Well, there is a story that I remember hearing, and in which I believe. The story is that Leontius, the son of Aglaon, coming up one day from the Piraeus, under the north wall on the outside, saw some dead bodies lying on the ground at the place of execution. He felt a desire to see them, and a dread and abhorrence of them. For a time, he struggled and covered his eyes, but eventually, the desire got the better of him. He forced his eyes open and ran up to the dead bodies, saying, "Look, you wretches, take your fill of the fair sight." I have heard the story myself, he said. The moral of the tale is that anger at times goes to war with desire, as though they were two distinct things. Yes, that is the meaning, he said. And are there not many other cases in which we observe that when a person's desires violently prevail over their reason, they revile themselves and are angry at the violence within them? In this struggle, which is like the struggle of factions in a state, their spirit is on the side of their reason. But for the passionate or spirited element to take part with the desires when reason decides that it should not be opposed, is something that I believe you never observed occurring in yourself, nor, as I would imagine, in anyone else? Certainly not. Suppose that a person thinks they have wronged another. The nobler they are, the less able they are to feel indignant at any suffering, such as hunger or cold, or any other pain which the injured person may inflict upon them. They deem these to be just, and their anger refuses to be excited by them. True, he said. But when they think that they are the ones suffering the wrong, then they boil and chafe, and are on the side of what they believe to be justice. And because they suffer hunger or cold or other pain, they are only more determined to persevere and conquer. Their noble spirit will not be quelled until they either slay or are slain, or until they hear the voice of the shepherd, that is, reason, bidding their dog bark no more. The illustration is perfect, he replied. And in our state, as we were saying, the auxiliaries were to be dogs, and to hear the voice of the rulers, who are their shepherds. I perceive, I said, that you quite understand me. There is, however, a further point which I wish you to consider. What point? You remember that passion or spirit appeared at first sight to be a kind of desire, but now we should say quite the contrary. For in the conflict of the soul, spirit is on the side of the rational principle. Most assuredly. But a further question arises, is passion different from reason also, or is it only a kind of reason? In the latter case, instead of 3 principles in the soul, there will only be 2, the rational and the concupiscent. Or rather, as the state was composed of 3 classes, traitors, auxiliaries, counselors, may there not be in the individual soul a third element which is passion or spirit, and when not corrupted by bad education, is the natural ally of reason? Yes, there must be a third element, he said. Yes, I replied, if passion, which has already been shown to be different from desire, turns out also to be different from reason. But that is easily proved. We may observe even in young children that they are full of spirit almost as soon as they are born, whereas some of them never seem to attain to the use of reason, and most of them attain it late enough. Excellent, I said. And you may see passion equally in brute animals, which is a further proof of the truth of what you are saying. And we may once more appeal to the words of Homer, which have already been quoted by us. He smote his breast, and thus rebuked his soul, for in this verse, Homer has clearly supposed the power which reasons about the better and worse to be different from the unreasoning anger which is rebuked by it. Very true, he said. And so, after much discussion, we have reached an agreement that the same principles which exist in the state also exist in the individual, and that there are 3 of them. Exactly. Must we not then infer that the individual is wise in the same way, and by virtue of the same quality that makes the state wise? Certainly. Also, the same quality that constitutes courage in the state constitutes courage in the individual, and both the state and the individual bear the same relation to all the other virtues. Assuredly. And the individual will be acknowledged by us to be just in the same way in which the state is just? That follows, of course. We cannot but remember that the justice of the state consisted in each of the 3 classes doing the work of its own class. We are not very likely to have forgotten, he said. We must remember that the person in whom the different qualities of their nature are working will be just and will do their own work, right? Yes, we must remember that too. And shouldn't the rational principle, which is wise and takes care of the whole soul, rule, while the passionate or spirited principle becomes the subject and ally? Certainly. And, as we were saying, the combined influence of music and physical education will bring them into harmony, strengthening and supporting reason with noble words and lessons, and moderating, soothing, and civilizing the wildness of passion through harmony and rhythm? Quite true, he said. And these 2, once nurtured and educated, and having truly learned their own functions, will rule over the concupiscent, which is the largest part of the soul in each of us and naturally the most insatiable for gain. They will guard against this part, lest it grows strong and powerful with bodily pleasures and attempts to enslave and rule those who are not its natural-born subjects, thereby disrupting the entire life of a person. Very true, he said. Together, won't they be the best defenders of the whole soul and body against external attacks? One advising and the other fighting under their leader, courageously carrying out their commands and advice? True. And should we not consider courageous the person whose spirit, in pleasure and in pain, follows the commands of reason about what they should or should not fear? Right, he replied. And we call wise the person who possesses the ruling part within them, which proclaims these commands. This part is also supposed to have knowledge of what is in the interest of each of the 3 parts and the whole. Certainly. And wouldn't you say that the person is temperate who has these same elements in friendly harmony, in whom the ruling principle of reason and the subject principles of spirit and desire are equally agreed that reason should rule and do not rebel? Certainly, he said, that is the true definition of temperance, whether in the state or in an individual. And surely, I said, we have explained repeatedly how and by virtue of what quality a person will be just. That is very certain. And is justice different in the individual? Does it have a different form, or is it the same as we found it to be in the state? In my opinion, there is no difference, he said. Because, if we still have any doubts, a few common examples will prove the truth of what I am saying. What kind of examples do you mean? I asked. If we are asked, must we not admit that the just state, or the person who is trained in the principles of such a state, will be less likely than the unjust person to steal a deposit of gold or silver? Would anyone deny this? No one, he replied. Will the just person or citizen ever commit sacrilege, theft, or treachery against their friends or their country? Never. Will they ever break a promise or agreement? Impossible. Will they be less likely to commit adultery or dishonor their parents or neglect their religious duties? No one. And the reason is that each part of them is doing its own business, whether ruling or being ruled? Exactly so. Are you satisfied, then, that justice is the quality that makes such people and such states, or do you hope to discover something else? Not I, indeed. Then our dream has come true, and the suspicion we had at the beginning of our work of constructing a just state, that some divine power must have guided us to a primary form of justice, has now been confirmed? Yes, certainly. And the division of labor that required the carpenter, the shoemaker, and the rest of the citizens to do their own work and not someone else's was a representation of justice, and for that reason, it was useful? Clearly. But in reality, justice was as we described it, concerned not with the outward appearance of a person, but with the inner self, which is the true self and concern of a person. The just person does not allow the different elements within them to interfere with each other or to do the work of others. They organize their own inner life and are their own master and law, at peace with themselves. And when they have harmonized the three principles within them, which can be compared to the higher, lower, and middle notes of a musical scale, and the intervals in between, when they have harmonized all these and are no longer divided but have become one completely temperate and perfectly balanced nature, then they proceed to act, if they have to, whether in matters of property, or in taking care of their body, or in some political or personal affair. They always consider and call actions that preserve and cooperate with this harmonious condition just and good, and the knowledge that governs it wisdom. And they call any action that disrupts this condition unjust, and the opinion that governs it ignorance. You have spoken the truth, Socrates. Very well, and if we were to say that we have discovered the just person and the just state, and the nature of justice in each of them, we would not be lying? Most certainly not. May we say so, then? Let us say so. And now, I said, let's consider injustice. Clearly. Mustn't injustice be a conflict that arises among the three principles? A meddling, interference, and uprising of a part of the soul against the whole? An assertion of unlawful authority made by a rebellious subject against a true ruler, of whom they are the natural subject. What is all this confusion and delusion but injustice, intemperance, cowardice, ignorance, and every form of vice? Exactly so. And if the nature of justice and injustice is known, then the meaning of acting unjustly and being unjust, or, again, of acting justly, will also be perfectly clear? What do you mean, he said. Perfectly clear? Why, I said, they are like disease and health, being in the soul, just what disease and health are in the body. How so, he said. Why, I said, that which is healthy causes health, and that which is unhealthy causes disease. Yes. And just actions cause justice, and unjust actions cause injustice? That is certain. And the creation of health is the institution of a natural order and government of one by another in the parts of the body, and the creation of disease is the production of a state of things at variance with this natural order? True. And is not the creation of justice the institution of a natural order and government of one by another in the parts of the soul, and the creation of injustice the production of a state of things at variance with the natural order? Exactly so, he said. Then virtue is the health and beauty and well-being of the soul, and vice the disease and weakness and deformity of the same? True. And do not good practices lead to virtue, and evil practices to vice? Assuredly. Still our old question of the comparative advantage of justice and injustice has not been answered, which is the more profitable, to be just and act justly and practice virtue, whether seen or unseen of gods and men, or to be unjust and act unjustly, if only unpunished and unreformed. In my judgment, Socrates, the question has now become ridiculous. We know that, when the bodily constitution is gone, life is no longer endurable, though pampered with all kinds of meats and drinks, and having all wealth and all power, and shall we be told that when the very essence of the vital principle is undermined and corrupted, life is still worth having to a person, if only they are allowed to do whatever they like with the single exception that they are not to acquire justice and virtue, or to escape from injustice and vice, assuming them both to be such as we have described? Yes, I said, the question is, as you say, ridiculous. Still, as we are near the spot at which we may see the truth in the clearest manner with our own eyes, let us not faint by the way. Certainly not, he replied. Come up here, I said, and behold the various forms of vice, those of them, I mean, which are worth looking at. I am following you, he replied, proceed. I said, the argument seems to have reached a height from which, as from some tower of speculation, a person may look down and see that virtue is one, but that the forms of vice are innumerable, there being 4 special ones which are deserving of note. What do you mean, he said. Perfectly clear? I mean, I replied, that there appear to be as many forms of the soul as there are distinct forms of the state. How many? There are 5 of the state, and 5 of the soul, I said. What are they? The first, I said, is that which we have been describing, and which may be said to have 2 names, monarchy and aristocracy, accordingly as rule is exercised by one distinguished person or by many. True, he replied. But I regard the 2 names as describing one form only, for whether the government is in the hands of one or many, if the governors have been trained in the manner which we have supposed, the fundamental laws of the state will be maintained. That is true, he replied. Summary of Chapter 4. In Chapter 4, Socrates continues the dialogue with his companions, focusing on the development of the guardian class and the nature of justice in the individual soul. The central theme of this chapter revolves around the virtue of the guardians and their education. Socrates explores the qualities that define these ideal rulers and defends the idea that they should live in a simple, communal manner. Their lives are to be devoid of luxuries to maintain their dedication to the well-being of the city over personal gain. Socrates also introduces the concept of the guardian's noble lie, a myth that reinforces the idea of the guardian's divine origin and their commitment to protecting the city. This myth is designed to instill loyalty and a sense of duty among the guardians. As the discussion unfolds, the conversation shifts to the nature of justice in the individual. Socrates argues that the just individual possesses a well-ordered soul, where reason governs over the appetites and emotions. He compares the structure of the just individual to the ideal city, where the philosopher kings rule with reason, the guardians represent the spirited element, and the producers embody the appetitive part of the soul. Socrates also delves into the concept of philosopher kings. He explains that the most just and virtuous individuals should rule the city, as they possess the knowledge and wisdom needed to make decisions for the common good. This idea challenges conventional forms of governance and highlights the importance of philosophical wisdom in leadership. Furthermore, the idea of the fevered city, describing a descent into tyranny. Socrates warns of the potential corruption of leaders and citizens when they prioritize personal gain and power over the welfare of the city. This discussion emphasizes the fragility of political systems and the need for virtuous leadership. In summary, Chapter 4 deepens the exploration of justice, both in the ideal city and in the individual soul. It underscores the importance of virtuous leadership, communal living, and the role of philosophy in guiding society toward justice and away from the dangers of tyranny.